Today we are honored to have Mr. Ted Pitts with us, the new president and CEO of the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce. He is here to tell us about the State Chamber's initiatives for 2015. Ted is a native of Lexington, South Carolina, married with 3 children, and a graduate of Presbyterian College. He spent 11 years working as a commercial real estate broker in Columbia, and from 2003 to 2010, he served in the South Carolina House representing Lexington's 69th District. In January of 2011, Ted joined then newly elected Governor Haley's administration as Deputy Chief of Staff, and then in September of 2013 was appointed by the Governor to the top job as Chief of Staff. In the fall of last year, he left the Governor's office to go to work for the South Carolina Chamber and became the Chamber's President and CEO last month. In addition to all that, Ted is currently a major in the South Carolina Army National Guard, and while on active duty deployment to Afghanistan in 2010, he was awarded the Bronze Star. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ted Pitts.
First, thank you, Bart and David, for having me. The Aiken Chamber and the job David has done is recognized throughout the state as I go around and speak to other chambers, local chambers. David does y'all well, does his community well, and want to recognize him for that. You know, back in, I guess, my early business career, I served on the board of the Lexington Area Chamber of Commerce, and I actually served with Governor Nikki Haley at the time, and neither one of us were elected to anything. So she was working with her family business, and I was in the commercial real estate business. So I know firsthand what role the local chambers play to kind of bring the community together, and it is an important part or an important piece to local communities, and I know Aiken is proud of their chamber here. You know, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out one of my bosses, Fred Dose, who's on the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce. And, you know, we are, I guess, our chamber, our state chamber, has representatives from across the state, and Aiken is represented well there as well. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the General Assembly. And, you know, the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, our tagline is we're the unified voice for business. And that unified voice for business is primarily at the State House with policymakers. And in Aiken County, you have one of the best delegations in the state. Senator Tom Young and I served together in the House. You know, one of the most favorite people that I've ever served with is your former Representative Roland Smith, who was just a scholar and a gentleman. You know, Nikki Setzler is on your delegation. He and I served on the delegation in Lexington. Shane Massey also represents part of Lexington. You know, Bill Hicks and Bill Taylor, I could name them all, but y'all have one of the delegations when they're in Columbia, they work together, and they're also recognized as leaders amongst the General Assembly. So you do have a good, strong voice. Your region and county does have a good, strong voice at the State House. When the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce puts together its competitiveness agenda, which it does each year, it goes around and has regional meetings and talks with our members. And in the past, in my time in the General Assembly or my time in the Governor's office, the chamber, state chamber, would have a competitiveness agenda that was 6 or 7 or 8 important things they wanted to see happen. And this year, our list has 2 things on it. And that list was developed before I showed up, and I think it was strategically important in the way they've done this. They said, you know, there are 2 important things that our members at the business community wants to see addressed this year. One of them is workforce and workforce development, and we've got Ready SC here, we've got the technical colleges here, we've got Chuck from CHE. Workforce development, K through 12, all that's important, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The second thing that the Chamber of Commerce said was important is infrastructure. And when we look at our state's crumbling infrastructure and the additional revenue that's needed to help just maintain that infrastructure, nonetheless try to improve it and increase capacity with the growing population we have here, and the economic development that's tied to that. The State Chamber of Commerce said this year we're going to be laser focused. You know, there are other issues that we will address, but those are the 2 issues that we want to see the General Assembly address this year, policymakers address this year. So when we look at that, you say, well, you know, that's smart. You know, these 2 items haven't really been talked about. We'll move them to the top of the list. Well, one of the first meetings I had at the State Chamber of Commerce was in December. I went to work there on December 1st, and it was a Christmas function for the staff. and they had a capsule, a time capsule that they had put together 10 years ago. Whichever the staff was there, put stuff in there from 10 years ago, and it said something like open, I think it actually said open in 2013, but I guess they didn't get to it until 2014. So they passed it around, and people were pulling things out, and one of the things that they pulled out was the Chamber of Commerce competitiveness agenda. And you want to know which two items were at the top of that list? Infrastructure and workforce development. And there were, 6 or 7 other things, and most of those 6 or 7 other things had been addressed over that period of time. But we have talked about, the state has talked about the need to address infrastructure and workforce, and the state chamber has said that this is the year, and we are going to focus on it, and we're going to hold members of the General Assembly accountable for that. For making progress in those fronts. And when we talk about workforce development, when you look at it, there are a lot of resources in our state that are spent on workforce development. And we need some additional resources, but there are a lot of resources that are spent. And one thing when we look at is the coordination. We believe, the business community believes that with those resources, they should be better coordinated. You've got the technical colleges, you've got the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce, which has gone through some reform in the last 5 years from the old ESC to DO, and Cheryl Stanton at DO, I give her credit. She, as the director, has said, we're going to go from being the unemployment agency to the employment agency. So this isn't the agency that's going to be focused on making sure you get your unemployment benefits. We will still do that, but we need to start focusing our resources on taking these people that are receiving unemployment benefits and providing them training. So when you look at workforce development, we talk about almost a paradigm shift that in the state we have to kind of approach this as that. And I'll use me as an example. When I graduated from Lexington High School and you go sit down with the guidance counselor, it was, Ted, you're college bound, which 4-year college do you want to go to? Well, when we look at this, and I found this out particularly in the governor's office, when we started looking at workforce, is some of those guidance counselors need to educate our graduating seniors and those high school graduates on, hey, you could go to a Presbyterian college like Ted Pitts did and get a degree in biology that I really haven't used at any point in time in my professional career. Or you could go look at Midlands Tech, and I'll identify a program at Midlands Tech. It's called the Michelin Scholars Program. Michelin is the largest employer in Lexington School District 1. And they partnered with the school district, and they said, identify me a group of top graduating seniors, and I'll pay for their schooling, for them to go to Technical Midlands Tech, and we'll train them to do our job. I'll also give them a part-time job while they're going to school so they can earn some extra money in one of our plants. And then here's the kicker, is when you graduate, if they don't want to come work for me, that's fine. They don't owe me any money. I see it as service to the community. If they want to go work at Boeing and move to Charleston, they can take the job skills and go to Boeing. So when we look at that, we say, yeah, that's great, but Ted, who went to Presbyterian College, he's going to get out of college and he's going to get a good job making probably $40,000 a year first year out of college. And they say, yeah, okay, well, you're going to get through this program and you're going to get out and you're going to make $60,000. And the upward mobility there is there. So when we talk about workforce, our 4-year comprehensive institutions need some attention. We all know that, and they'll talk about that, how their revenue from the state has gone down over the last decade. But when we talk about, kind of what the economic developers in this state, Bobby Hitt at Commerce will say is that, part of the reason we beat, Texas or Tennessee, who have no income taxes and maybe have some different things, part of the reason we beat them is because of our technical college system, Ready SC, which is able to, and they did it here with Bridgestone, and if you look at the stuff that they've done, Ready SC's done with Bridgestone, is out of the box. It's going to a foreign country and taking South Carolinians to a foreign country to train them on the processes that they do to Bridgestone and other plants, and then bringing those people back, and it's seamless, and Bridgestone gets the same production here that they get out of a mature plant in another place. So when you talk about workforce development, it is that focus, and we have to maintain focus on it. And the Chamber of Commerce and the business community, we're not worried, but there is some heightened interest with all the jobs and the announcements that the state's coming. It is going to get harder for employers probably to find the skilled workforce they need unless we try to get in front of the curve. And that's what I think Senator Young and others are working to try to do, and I know Governor Haley is focused on it. The second thing that's on our competitiveness agenda is infrastructure. You know, when you look at it, I don't care how you look at it, and you know, the DOT says that we need $1.5 billion additional dollars each year to maintain and do what needs to happen with our infrastructure. That's a lot of money. I think we would say reasonably the General Assembly is not going to pass a bill that doubles the DOT's budget, nor would that be responsible government to say, here's an agency, let's basically double your budget, because the capacity is just not there to deploy those resources if you did it. But what the business community has said, and the state chamber specifically has said, we think it is important that you invest 600 to 800 million new dollars in infrastructure. And that's about half that 1.5, but we feel like that's reasonable. And when you look at our revenue stream, it's not very diverse. You know, in other states, the gas tax is less than half of the revenue stream that goes to roads, where in South Carolina, it's almost 90% of the revenue stream. So what we would say is the chamber and the business community has not told members of the General Assembly how you need to address this problem, but it says we expect you to address this problem. And currently, you know, the governor has rolled out her plan that puts about $333 million additional dollars. If you add the other half of the sales tax on vehicles that she's done, she's close to $400 million. The House Ad Hoc Committee, Speaker Jay Lucas, who's the new Speaker of the South Carolina House, one of the first things he did as interim Speaker about 6 months ago was put an ad hoc committee together to look at infrastructure. It's a bipartisan committee of members of the House, and they are taking a look at what they believe a compromise could look like. That committee has approved a bill, or approved a concept or a proposal that hopefully will become a bill. And I talked to Gary Simmerl out of York County, who's the chairman of that committee, and he believes that bill will be ready to be introduced next week. He believes it'll have broad support. You know, when we talk about a compromise, I mean, there will be people that don't like the House's bill. There's people, I saw that my friend Todd Rutherford held a press conference yesterday, you know, telling how much he didn't appreciate or didn't like the governor's proposal. So you'll hear a lot of people that are saying why we can't do that or this. I think what the business community has said is that you're gonna do something. Our expectations are that you do something, and your policymakers. And you know, thank goodness that Columbia doesn't operate like DC. You have people like Tom Young and Nikki Setzer, who are Republican and Democrat, that can sit down and work something out. But we've got to do something. Doing nothing is not the answer. It's not acceptable. So that bill hopefully is introduced next week, and hopefully the House will adopt it quickly, and it'll go to the Senate, and then the Senate will, you know, do what, you know, the House always joke that, you know, the governor rolled out her plan, and then the House said good, and then they put it in the trash can and drafted their own plan. The House is going to draft their own plan. They're going to send it to the Senate, and they're going to put it in the trash can and draft their own plan. So at the end of the day, there's going to be a requirement that leaders from both the House and the Senate and the executive branch sit down and say, all right, what can we all coalesce around? But the business community is there, and you know, our approach is to be encouraging. There is progress being made, and if things don't just happen overnight, so a proposal has to work its way through the process, and the dialogue is occurring, we think, to hopefully address it this year. But our intent is to keep a focus on those two issues and to make sure the General Assembly addresses them. You know, I'll close with really one thing, which is, you know, in South Carolina, we are really lucky. When you look at the advantages we have with the Port of Charleston, when we talked about the technical college system, when you look at the communities that we have, like Aiken and North Augusta and Lexington and York and Rock Hill and in the upstate Greenville, I mean, we have so many great communities with good people that can be trained to do just about anything. You know, it's funny when we look at kind of the activities down in Charleston, where organized labor has moved in and is going to try to hold an election in a unit. You know, those same people that are now trying to convince people in that company to organize are the same people that said, you know, why would you want to move a plant to the swamp, calling Charleston a swamp? Has also said, those people are not going to be able to build planes. Talking about those people, talking about South Carolinians. But when you look at the progress that they've made down there and what they're doing and what that manufacturer will tell you about how pleased they are with the progress and how we're ahead of schedule, to me it's just interesting that outside interest will shoot at us, but then once they realize that we have delivered on what we're going to deliver on, now they're going to convince us that they want to help us out. And that's something that the state chamber and the business community almost takes personally. So we will continue to work on that front as well, and we continue to do it by helping businesses be successful. If businesses are successful and have a good bottom line, they'll take care of their employees. They'll hire additional employees. They'll invest it with philanthropy in our communities, and they'll make South Carolina a better place. So, as I take over the helm at the State Chamber, Otis Rawl, who is also another Lexington boy who's not going anywhere, he's agreed to stay on as an advisor and consultant. And I asked him, does that mean, because it was funny, somebody said, hey Ted, there was a member said, can you go hunting for these 3 days? And I was like, no, I got to work. And Otis was like, hey, I'll do that. So he's an advisor and consultant. So he's the guy that fills in on golf, on a round of golf and helps. He's around. He served the chamber in a good capacity. Hunter Howard before him. The state chamber is in a good place, and it is recognized brand with policymakers across the street at the State House. And my goal is to show up and to continue that progress and want to work with the business community across the state, whether you're a member or not a member, to help make sure that we're doing right and that South Carolina continues to be the best place in the world to do business. Thank you.